Well, welcome everybody to what is this? This is the July 2021 installment of the Microsoft Data Platform Continuity Virtual Group. My name is David Klee. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day, either live today on the 29th of July or recorded. This will be up on YouTube here shortly. I'd like to present today. This is Edwin Sarmiento presenting 3 reasons why focusing on tech is the worst way to deploy an HADR solution. So I'll turn it over to you.
Hopefully you can see my screen because I only shared my screen in this. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, wherever you guys are. Welcome. I'm excited to be doing this because, for one, it's been a while since I did technical presentations. Not that I haven't done any. I've been focusing more on a couple of things. My HADR stuff, as always. And I started doing coaching for tech people, which is a lot of people have been asking me, why do you do that? Last year has been really challenging for a lot of tech people. We're in a lot of stress. The work that we do is already challenging. It's just that the pandemic just made it worse. And a lot of people out there are struggling. So I made a decision, in addition to what I do as part of the tech consulting, is just provide guidance and coaching to people who are struggling. Anyway, today's topic, one of the reasons why I'm excited about this is because this is a pattern that I've seen. I've been doing a lot of these stuff for the past almost 15 years now. And, when it comes to high availability and disaster recovery, I've seen certain patterns. And not only that, as data professionals, I'm going to assume a lot of you are data professionals. It's very easy to spot patterns in data and patterns. And here's the thing. This is very important, very critical, because if you don't pay attention to this, you'll fall into the same old. And what I mean by same old is you're going to be falling into the trap of focusing on tech alone, that it'll make your life as a sysadmin, DBA, network admin, you name it, a lot more miserable. And I'm going to explain later why. And that's the whole premise of this presentation. 3 reasons why. My name is Edwin Sarmiento. I specialize in high availability and disaster recovery. If you want to connect with me on either Twitter or LinkedIn, feel free to do so. And if you do have questions, feel free to ask them throughout the presentation. I'd be happy to address them while we're at it. As always, I like to tell stories. In 2008, I've had the privilege to moved to the beautiful city of Ottawa in Canada, here in Canada, where you get to see the parliament every day and catch a glimpse of Justin Trudeau, if you may. And being born and raised in a tropical country, I only knew of 2 seasons, the wet and the dry season. That's it. And moving here gave me the opportunity to experience different types of seasons. You got your winter, your spring, your summer, or fall. I have no intent of singing that song, whatever it is that you're thinking about. But the idea here is that I got to experience different seasons that allowed me to adopt and adapt to this new environment, this new culture, and of course, this new weather changes. So the first thing that I did was, of course, we got here on sometime late fall. I got to be prepared for the winter, right? Put on winter clothes, anything to keep me warm. But one of the biggest challenges living in the northeast side is dealing with the snow. 3 feet, 4 feet, that's normal for us, typically. No, that's normal winter for us. So it got me into these crazy searches about snowblowers. How do I get rid of the snow? And I started looking at what are the available either snowblowers, snowplows, shovels, what have you. And of course, all of these websites would give you different options like dual headlights for your snowblower. Just in case you decide at 3 o'clock in the morning, you want to shovel snow off your driveway, or maybe some heated hand grips, just in case you couldn't find your snow gloves to get a hold of your blower while you're plowing snow. Or maybe those one-touch electric chute control with touchscreen controls. Or maybe some in-dash remote pitch control. Or automated robotic snow blower. Name it, any of these features. Now, it's interesting because I see some parallels between me looking up whatever is possible to keep my driveway clean on a cold winter snowy day, and technical professionals like us, DBAs, sysadmins, consultants, everybody who's deploying HADR solutions. And I'm not just talking about SQL Server here, because I know a lot of you, your backgrounds are more into the SQL Server space, but I'm talking about any type of HADR solution. Because here's the thing. The features have always been the central focus. And if you look at the timeline, since the beginning, 2008 and earlier, we talk about failover clustering, log shipping, database mirroring. 2012 introduced availability groups, multi-subnet failover clusters. And then we had stuff that allowed us to leverage the cloud, like backup to URL or managed backup to Azure, or with 2016 introducing load balancing of read-only routing, and then now with Linux. We got SQL Server on Linux, SQL Server on containers, read scale without a cluster resource manager. With 2019, we're looking at SQL Server on Kubernetes. My point is that every time a conversation happens around deploying a high availability and disaster recovery solution, we've always looked at features, the technology, whatever is available for that particular product that we want to use. And here's the thing. Because of this, consultants, DBAs, sysadmins, service providers, and even Microsoft, we focus more on the features. Every conversation you will have, oh yeah, we're going to be, we need high availability. Oh sure, let's put in always on availability groups. Let's put in failover clustering. And here's, again, working on this particular field for the past 15 years, seeing the trends. Every time a client or a customer would reach out to me and they would ask me, hey, can you help me build this 3-node cluster with 3 replica availability groups span across 2 different data centers? This is what they usually start with. It's interesting because when you even when you ask questions on forums or news groups, or this one I got from the Microsoft, this was the old TechNet and MSDN forums. A question like this, where I have this requirement, I need to implement this, I need this, and I need this. The response will always be, or not always, the response most of the time would be, please check this blog. It's all about availability groups. Oh, and it's for multi-subnet failover cluster. Hope this could help you. And again, no offense to the person who did this, but this is the natural response for somebody who's asking questions that pertain to anything HA and DR. And I like this quote from Henry David Thoreau that said, men have become the tools of their tools. Because quite frankly, though, we are focusing on the wrong things. Now, I'm not saying don't. I'm not saying don't focus on the wrong things. It's just that our attention, our immediate response to any conversation about high availability, disaster recovery, always might be a hard word, but most of the time has been on the tech. Because we've been conditioned to focus on the wrong things. In fact, I want to show you this picture, and I want you to type in the chat section what you see about this. It took me a while to find this picture, but I want you to type in the chat section or the comment section. What do you see about this photo? And of course, I already gave it away. This ad was designed to keep your focus on one thing, the product. Yes, it is a product, right? And again, it's interesting because this is something that we have been conditioned. You might be wondering, what do you mean conditioned? Well, you went to university, you went to community college, you studied computers, and all you think about, all you learned was all about technology. I want to go back to my journey in the beginning years of me moving here in Canada about looking for the perfect snowblower with all of these features. What good are these if they don't meet my needs? Well, for one, I'm not here during the winter, so I don't really care. So it doesn't make sense for me to buy the most expensive, the most high-tech snowblower if I'm not even here to use it. What's the point? And that's why I want to focus on the three things. Why focusing on why focusing on the tech is the wrong way to deploy high availability and disaster recovery solution. The first one is we talk about people. What do I mean by that? When you focus more on the tech, you tend to bypass people. Bypassing people simply means you're so focused on the tech, you're not seeing the people side of it. What do I mean by that? And of course, I intentionally use a photo of a hockey team. I pretend I play hockey, but I don't. Staff availability is one. Oftentimes, I would get into a consulting engagement or a project with a customer, and they want me to build this massively large, massively complex infrastructure. And it's interesting because they're not even thinking about who's going to be maintaining this down the road. Are there people available? Team capabilities and skills. They want to deploy the latest, the greatest. Oh, because Microsoft told them to do this, not realizing nobody on their team knows how to maintain it or knows how to build it even. What about motivation? How does that factor in? Well, if you don't have the right people on the team, what makes you think the developer would be keen enough to pick this up and eventually support it? Because he has a totally different motivation from the person who was all in when it comes to deploying the solution. What about individual career goals? A lot of people talk about the accidental DBA, the guy who was sitting closest to the database server, who ended up taking care of the database server because he was the person closest to it. He didn't know anything about databases, didn't know how databases work. He just happens to be the guy sitting closest to it. Now he's there. You think he's motivated? Going back to the motivation. Do you think he's going to be motivated enough to even take care of something like that? Probably not. And then personalities. Somebody might be keen on learning new things because he's hungry, he's eager, he wants to learn, and he wants to make sure that he gets the job done. Or maybe the guy who's just waiting for retirement until he's ready to okay, I'm throwing in the towel, I'm going fishing, I'm never coming back to work. And of course, budget. When I talk about budget, I'm not just talking about finance. In fact, this has everything to do with staff availability. If you don't have the budget, how can you hire for a new team? Because keep in mind, deploying a solution is just one part of it. You're not going to buy a car and drive it indefinitely, not expecting it to be maintained. And so you have to think about the people aspect. And I only gave you some of these because there's really so many things to cover as far as the people aspect is concerned. Deploying a solution is just one thing, but if you don't consider the people aspect, it is easy to fall into the trap of deploying a solution where nobody knows how to maintain it. Worst part of it is when an outage happens, nobody knows how to fix it. I mean, it's a good thing for me. They call me, but that's not my goal, right? And so I did promise I'm going to give you some use cases here. One of my clients, this was a client from about 4 years ago. They're a financial services company, and they wanted to do a data center migration, but did not want to buy enterprise edition licenses. And I use these case studies to illustrate the point. This was their current architecture. They were running SQL Server 2008 R2 Standard Edition. They had database mirroring, and they had transactional replication with 2 SQL Server instances for their reporting. And they want to upgrade. They want to move away from this because, well, database mirroring is no longer supported, and they want to make sure that they're not spending a lot of money on licensing. And so they came to me and said, "Oh, this is what we want. We heard of this thing called always on availability groups, and well, it may have been a little bit expensive on the enterprise edition licensing, but we're covered because we've got SA, so we can upgrade with no additional cost. Or even if we do have to pay for an additional cost, not as much as we expected to." So this is our proposed arc. And to be honest, we spent like 4 hours talking about this. Well, they did. I was just listening. We want this, we want this, we want that. Oh yeah, they've already told me how everything is going to look like. Yes, I did keep quiet all the time because I had a ton of questions about this. But I only had one question that got them to rethink their strategy. That question was, you have a full-time DBA? Yeah, that's how it went down. Pause for like minutes. I was kind of curious about how they came up with this architecture and why they wanted to do it this way and this. And they attended this Microsoft event where they heard about always on availability groups, and they could do this and they could do that. And so they went ahead, started buying the machines, the servers, and they're getting ready to cut over to this. They just need some guidance to get them to this proposed architecture. I don't even know how they came up with the architecture. This one question made them reconsider. And I said, there's nothing wrong with your architecture. There's nothing wrong with where you want to take your existing architecture. I just don't see where somebody like a full-time DBA would come in if you don't even have one. And these are the types of questions that we needed to ask. I couldn't count the number of times where somebody would say, we want you to help us with this. Our senior DBA is already building it. And I asked, how many people do you have on your team working on this? One. Yeah. It's as if the guy's not going to be taking vacation days. It's as if the guy's not going to be getting sick. It's as if the person's sole purpose in life is to take care of this new architecture that they're building. That's why you cannot go around design and infrastructure without first looking at the people aspect. In fact, whenever I build an architecture or a solution for a customer, this is the first thing that I ask. I will build you this thing, but if you don't have any people on the team to take care of it, I won't. Because I don't want to get woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning and being called in to fix an outage because nobody on their team is capable of dealing with the outage. So that's the first thing. When you focus mostly on tech, you tend to bypass the people aspect. And I already covered quite a bit there: staff availability, their motivation, their skill set. I mean, when you think about it, you won't put an intern on an operating room and expect him to do more of the surgery. That'd be scary, wouldn't it? Yet we expect a lot of people who don't have the proper training, who don't have the right mindset to deal with mission critical revenue generating databases that could potentially cost billions of dollars when an outage happens. To start by making sure you're not bypassing the people. The second one is all about the process. When you focus more on tech, you tend to forget about the process. What do I mean by the process? Well, here's the thing. What good is an availability solution, HA or DR solution, when it's not even meeting your recovery objectives nor your service level agreements? And in a lot of the conversations, especially with DBAs or tech people, the typical response that I get is, well, I'm not responsible for that. It's supposed to be the business stakeholders telling me that. And I totally get it. I'm not saying it is your responsibility. All I'm saying is, this should be the goal. And if the business stakeholders don't know, it is our responsibility to guide them through the process. In fact, I am giving you the privilege and the opportunity to start calling yourselves trusted advisors, not technicians. You're not a DBA anymore. You're not a sysadmin anymore. You're not even a consultant anymore. You're a trusted advisor, meaning the business stakeholders don't know anything about this. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but it is our responsibility to guide them through the process. In fact, one of the presentations I did was, I think I don't want to say a heated argument. In the past, I spent a lot of time on news groups and forums, and every time I do respond to a question, people would ask me, what do you mean? And of course, my response to a technical question would always be, so what's your recovery objective and what's your service level agreement? And like, what do you mean? Well, this is the starting point of every HA and DR solution. If you don't even know what your RPO and RTO and your SLA is, then why are you building the HA DR solution in the first place? In fact, this is the goal. This is the goal. And if you don't know what your goal is, what makes you think you're going to make it there? You have to define the RPO and RTO and your SLAs properly. And again, it is not our responsibility to define this. It is the business stakeholders' responsibility. It is our responsibility to guide them through the process of defining this. The second thing is invoking disaster recovery. I had a client a couple of years ago where we wrote the manual. I built the infrastructure, we wrote the manual, and we tested it. So they have a full-on document where you give it to somebody who knows nothing about what's going on. Just follow the step-by-step document on how to do everything to invoke disaster recovery. It's a foolproof document. 4 years later, I asked, when was the last time you tested this? Yeah, again, crickets. Because how good is a document? How good is a process if you're not even testing it? In the same conversation around backups, one of the reasons I don't believe in backups, because I couldn't count the number of times I've been bitten by customers who told me they have backups. My argument has always been, if you've never tested your backups and if you've never validated they work, they're useless. So many customer stories about dealing with a corrupted data page. And it's easy to fix a corrupted data page so long as you have a proper backup. Some of my clients realized that their database backups have corrupted databases only when they needed to restore from those backups. Another client from about 3 years ago reached out. The worst time to have data corruption on your database. If you're a payroll service company, it's the day before payroll. And so if you're not even testing these, or what's worse is if you don't even have a disaster recovery process, what are you going to be testing? Or what are you going to be doing when it happens? What about BCP or business continuity? How are you preparing for this? This didn't really struck me as something that's important because I was really focused on the tech. When I was working as a data center engineer, we focused so much on HA and DR because that's our entire business model. We were the cloud, and we were providing HA and DR solutions as our business model. And interestingly, when we had, and this was not even intentional, we had an earthquake. This was 2007, I think. And when you live in Singapore, you don't really experience a lot of earthquakes. And we were, I think, on the 20th floor. We went down and we realized, wait a second, Singapore is a very small city. Yeah, it's the country in itself is just a city. And if this entire place gets wiped out, how are we going to, number one, invoke disaster recovery? And number two, how are we going to be invoking business continuity? And that's when we started thinking about all of these things. Where are the people going to be when we need to invoke disaster recovery? Because here's the thing, and this is also another conversation around, we want to do automatic failover across data centers. Here's the reality. And I hate to break it to you. When a real disaster strikes, nobody in their right minds would think, oh, how do I RGP into the data center so I start automating, failing over all of my servers? Nobody on their right minds would do that. In fact, Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy taught us this, but it's really interesting to see it firsthand because it's one thing to hear stories, but it's another when you get to experience it firsthand. I was doing my Always On Available Group training class back in 2017, and then one of the attendees sent a message out of nowhere. Got to bounce, sorry, emergency, boom. Next day, sent an email apologizing. I'm really sorry I had to bounce yesterday. We were having an emergency evacuation. I think they were in Florida. And everybody was told to get out of here. Grabbed a laptop, hopped onto the van, took everyone in the family and drove up north. Like I said, nobody in their right mind would be thinking about how do I fail over the databases and the servers and the apps to our secondary data center when that thing happens. No one. Because when you're in a real disaster, your first concern is safety, security, and your family. That's why you have to be prepared for this. And here's the truth. I want to circle back to what I mentioned earlier about the people. When people are in stress, when people are panicking, they're not going to be in their right minds to even think straight. Couldn't count the number of times customers with their really experienced engineers, years and years of experience, have worked on an issue for 4 hours. And these are people who have worked in the industry much longer than I've been. I come in less than 5 minutes, I fix a problem. And it has nothing to do with my capacity or my experience or my skill to do what they could have done. It's just because of the fact that they were panicking, they were stressed out, they were freaked out, and they couldn't think straight. And that's why you need to prepare for this. Issue resolution and escalation. when an incident happens, when, and I'm, again, it's never a question of if, it's a question of when, because it will always happen. I can guarantee you. A lot of my customers say, yeah, after you fix your system, it was kind of like a set and forget kind of thing. We don't even realize that it's there, it's humming along, it's working fine. And I said, that's good to hear, but it's not going to stay like that forever. We're dealing with systems that were designed by people. Somewhere along the line, somewhere in the near future, something's going to happen and you have to prepare for it. So when that happens, how do you resolve the issue? How do you escalate that? Do you even have an escalation process? Or it always goes to you because you're the person on the team that says, if anything happens, call this guy. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the guy who gets woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning because some issue happened. Even worse. They had an outage. It was for a staging environment and they called me. I don't want that. Even worse, how do they escalate if there is nobody to escalate to because nobody on the team knows how to deal with this? And that's why you have to find the gaps in the people who will be available in the process. How do we get in touch with the right people? Or how to respond to an incident when it happens? And you got to set the expectations. Like I said, you wouldn't want to be woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning because your always on available group is offline, not realizing that we're looking at a DR environment. And then your boss or your manager will start telling you, hey, how come you didn't respond to the incident? Well, we didn't set the expectation that our service level agreement for DR is this. For HA, it's this. And unless you set the expectations right, they're going to keep coming to you for anything. Oh, I want you to fix my mouse. It's not working. Well, that's kind of like not my job, but then you haven't set the expectation right. And of course, the budget. And I'm not just talking about the financial thing here. You have to budget for time because you have to test whether or not your processes work. You have to budget for resources because somebody has to write that freaking manual, that document that we know. I'm just saying that because nobody actually wants to write documentation. Nobody. We all want to get our hands on the latest, the greatest, the tech, because that's where the action is. It's like you're getting demoted to do desk work when you start working in documentation, but that's actually the most important thing. And that's why we need to set all of these expectations. Another case study here, I've got a healthcare services company, and they had an availability group stretched failover cluster, and it's causing a lot of availability issues. And mind you, a 4-hour outage for them is roughly around $150,000. And this is interesting because they saw an uptake, an increase in their transaction last year because of the pandemic. Because now everybody's doing telehealth and they have to provide services online. So they've seen an increase in their transactions, not realizing that their infrastructure is not ready for that. They came to me and they told me, look, this is what we have. Windows Server 2012 R2 failover cluster, Windows Server 2016 Enterprise Edition, and then we've got an availability group stretched across our local data center and Azure. That happens to be our disaster recovery site. We want this. We heard that this could resolve all of our outages because now we don't have to deal with a quorum type where it's somewhere in between the primary and the secondary data center. And Microsoft is telling us we have to put the witness on the third data center. Made sense. This is what they wanted. Now, mind you, for projects like these, this is a consultant's dream. Because for one, it covers all of the complex technologies you've never seen. the most challenging issues that you could ever face, and it's the consultant's dream if they really want the challenge. This is it. We talked about this for a while. I simulated the environment in my test lab, but the only question that I asked, and by the way, they do have senior DBAs. So the people aspect is really not an issue for them. They have senior DBAs, and they've gone through my training class, so they were ready for this. But in the process of me evaluating their team's capabilities, their skill set, and the proposed architecture, I don't know. I just couldn't get it off my mind. The only question I asked was, well, do you have a DR escalation process? It's interesting when you don't get a response from a question. It means either they're really thinking or they're not expecting that kind of question from you. Here's the thing, they want to build this. And by the way, their current architecture has been around for years. I think they started out with Windows Server 2003. Built it on Windows Server 2003, SQL 2005, upgraded it until they end up having Windows Server 2012 R2 with SQL Server 2016. And I mean, this is a legacy system that they kept upgrading and migrating and upgrading. So the current architecture has been on for like 7 years at this point. Yeah, 7 or 6. The point is, they don't have a DR escalation process. They don't. And so what's the point of building something like this where you have a DR site and you got a solution that addresses both HA and DR when you don't even have a DR escalation process? Yeah? What's the point? And so these are the things, like I said, tech people are so fixated on the fact that, yeah, I want to build this. I've got to have a distributed AG. I want to have the network topology to make sure that I don't send a lot of traffic. And they're all fixated on that without realizing they don't even have a DR escalation process. And I said, forget about anything that we're doing here, because it's going to be a total waste of time, money, resource, and effort. And I don't want your money if we're not going to be able to resolve the main issue, which is what we're going to be talking about next. We need a proper DR escalation process, because you want to make sure that when a real disaster strikes, nobody's scrambling around trying to figure out how are we going to deal with this. And this is important. You want to make sure that when a real disaster happens, everyone on the team, number one, knows what they need to do. Number two, are confident enough that they can do it. And number three, they're in the right state of mind to do it. We've done DR exercises like 3 or 4 times in a year, to a point where somebody would say, I want you to go on vacation tomorrow because we're doing DR exercise. I'm like, why? Because we want to make sure that the junior guy knows what he's doing. And we want to make sure he's in the right state of mind in order to do this. But this is part of the process. We're involving the right people. We are making sure that we have the right process in place to make sure that whatever HA and DR solution that you deploy is something that would meet your needs. Which leads me to the third one. I thought you said you're not supposed to be focusing on tech. Well, here's the thing. When you focus more on tech, you tend to ignore what I call creative technologies. And I don't mean other technologies. I'm just saying, if you're focused so much on the tech that's right in front of you, you don't open yourself up to the possibilities that there are other technologies out there that could possibly solve this at a much cheaper way, a much more effective way. And one of the most creative technologies that has ever been invented is your brain. I've got a perfect case study for this. It is your brain. Now, here's the thing. When tech people fixate on the tech, they forget the only thing that matters. You know what that thing is? The goal. You're not building an availability group. You're not building a failover cluster. You're not building log shipping, replication. You're not building all of this because you want that. That's just a means to an end. Yet we're fixated on the means and forgetting about the most important thing, which is the goal. And that's why I say all the time, focus on the why. Why are you doing this in the first place? Not the how. Because when you fixate on the how, the tech, it now becomes the goal. The goal is not to build I'm just going to use the example, previous example. You're not going to be building an 8-node or an 8 replica availability group span across 2 different data centers where you have a distributed AG. That is not the goal. Yet we spend so much time, money, resources, and effort, sleepless nights on trying to fixate on the how, not the why. Perfect case study. Now, 3 years ago, I had a client, software as a service company, and they wanted to do a lift and shift. It's technically taking your entire infrastructure, putting it on Azure. We did the math, and they had physical machines, 3 replica AG, 3-node failover cluster. I'll just show you the picture. This is their current architecture, and they wanted to do a lift and shift. And just like any cloud project initiative, especially the business stakeholders, will do the math, the cost, and all of these things. Sure, we're not going to be spending a lot on CapEx. We're going to be spending a lot on OpEx. They did the math, they prepared the plan, and then they reached out to me. Hey, we want you to help us with our lift and shift project. We know a little bit of Azure stuff. We know this and we know that. But when we did the math, this is going to be very expensive. And I asked, okay, so why? Yeah, we need this VM and this size and this licensing and this and that. And okay. And I'm pretty sure you know where I'm going with this. They told me everything that they want, and this is exactly where they wanted to go. And I only had one question. What was the goal? And they told me, well, we wanted to move to Azure because we're going to move away from our existing colo because it was expensive. And like, that's not what I'm asking. What is the goal? And they kept going back to, yeah, we want to move to Azure. And I kind of used what I call the 5 whys. It's something that I learned when I was a kid that made my parents really annoyed of me. The 5 whys are the 5 why questions for every response that they had. And after asking the 5 whys, I found out that the only reason they had an available group like this was because they wanted to keep their databases highly available for when they do their maintenance. And it only happens once a month. Once a month, they wanted to make sure that their databases are highly available in case they're doing maintenance. And I'm talking about Windows updates, SQL Server updates, hardware maintenance, the whole 9 yards with maintenance. And I'm like, so you're telling me you built this really expensive infrastructure that you only need for 4 hours a month? Yep. Silence. I love it when I hear silence because it means they're thinking. And it's interesting because how they perceive their goal to be turned out to be totally different from what they ended up having. I think I think I can share the final solution for this. What ended up happening was we created a single node failover cluster with a single replica AG. that is 99.9 something SLA on Azure. And during that time of the month when they needed to do maintenance, we will spin up a new VM, add it to Active Directory, add it to the failover cluster, add it to the AG with the updates that they want to install. And 2 hours later, we will decommission the old VM and now everything's updated. Looked way cheaper, less complex than what they currently have. Because they think this was the goal. They think that the goal was, we want this 3-node availability group with 3-node failover cluster. We want to move this on to the cloud. Doesn't matter if it's Azure or AWS. But the thing is, that's what they think they wanted. But they forgot what the real goal was. Their main goal was to stay online within that 4 hours in a month that they need to do maintenance. And that's how powerful this is, because when you start looking at tech alone, you tend to forget that there are people responsible for making sure that this entire architecture gets built, implemented, maintained, monitored. You tend to forget that we need to have a process in place in order for this entire architecture, once it's built, to be maintained, failed over, whatever process needs to be. And we tend to forget that there are other ways that you can solve a problem if only you focus on the goal. And that's why I want to share with you what I call my framework. In fact, I've already shared it with you. I call it the PPT manifesto. This is something that I came up with when I was working as a data center engineer, because realizing that just focusing on the tech alone could cause a lot of these issues. P stands for people. You always start with the people. I'm not going to deploy a solution if nobody knows how to use it. I'm not going to deploy a solution if nobody is going to be available to maintain it. It always has to start with the people. And I say always. In fact, every technology problem is really a people problem underneath. They're not communicating. They don't have the skills. There's no one available. It has to start with the people first. Once you have the people in place and once you have their buy-in, then you start talking about the process. Now, at this point, there's not even a conversation about, do we build a cluster? Do we have an AG? How do we configure the network? There's not even a conversation about the tech. You start with the people. Well, let me back down first. You start with the goal. What is the goal? What is the real goal? That's step 0. Start with the goal. And then look at the people. Who's available? Do they have the skills? Are they available? And are they willing? And then you start defining the process. Only after you've defined the goal, only after you've considered the people and you've laid out the process needed is when you start looking at the technology. We had it the other way around. We had it backwards. We start with the technology and then we start looking at the people and then we leave the process as last. That's a side effect of focusing on the tech. And that's why it's the worst way to build, design, and deploy an HA solution. It has to start with the goal. Then you move on to the people, work on the process, and then finally you choose the appropriate technology. So I call it the PPT manifesto because, again, every HADR project solution that I've ever worked with had these. And only when we've solidified the goal, we are clear on the goal, we were clear on what they really want. And again, I try to brush aside any technical conversation until we are clear on the goal. Sometimes customers get annoyed. I'm like, okay, is your goal to build an AG or is your goal to provide availability? You have to stick with defining clear, concise goals. I like looking at it as, it doesn't matter how good, or it doesn't matter if you have a fancy self-driving Tesla with all of these features. If you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter. There's no way that the self-driving car would end up to wherever you want to go if in the first place you don't even know where that is. And that's why you have to start with a goal. And this is the framework. This is, like I said, this is how I deal with all of my HADR projects. And I only, of course, it's interesting. The clients would reach out to me because they've read the article that I wrote about distributed availability group. And they say, oh yeah, this is the guy. This is the perfect guy who could help us. And then they talk to me and I don't even talk one word about distributed AG. Oh, this guy, he wrote the book on SQL Server on Docker, and I don't even talk one word about technology. And that's why this framework is so powerful, because it gets my clients, my customers, the goals that they want, not the technology that they want to deploy, because that's just secondary. Focus on the goal. And that wraps up my my presentation for today. And I don't see any questions on the chat window. I don't know if there were any.
No questions. But honestly, this is one of those presentations that if I could frame it and force everybody that I know to watch this, I would do so immediately. This is fantastic. If anybody has any questions, any thoughts, please put them in the chat window. Otherwise, thank you. This will be posted on YouTube on the new Data Platform Continuity Virtual Chapter YouTube channel here as soon as we can get it rendered. And this has been stellar. Thank you.
And if I may, shameless plug, I'm actually doing a whole day workshop. And I know I talked about don't focus on the tech, but a lot of people struggle with the tech. This is a workshop that I just recently started. And it was amazing how people were like, I didn't realize you could do that. It's all about how you can leverage your knowledge and your skills to be an infrastructure engineer. What I've seen out in the field, even people who have been working with SQL Server, who have been DBAs for decades, they struggle so much with infrastructure that by the time they move to the cloud, they don't even realize it's an infrastructure problem because they were so focused on the database. So I'm inviting everyone to this. If you have any questions, it's going to be on the 21st of August, 1 month from now. Reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a link to this, let me know. I'd be happy to post that when I post the recording.
Sure.
Outstanding. Cool. Well, thank you again. If nobody has any other questions, got a great comment here. I'm glad he got to listen. Has a situation currently that may now change the recommendation. So that is awesome. Cool. Well, thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, either live or watching this here in the future on YouTube. Thank you. We will have another one of these next month, so I look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks again, Edwin. Thanks for everybody for joining, and we'll see you soon.